So, hello everybody, welcome to our Bright Ideas meeting online today, looking at energy audits in primary care. We have the wonderful Abby from Community Energy Plus, who's going to go through some slides with us. And then there will be hopefully opportunities for questions, but if you could put them in the chat or save them till the end, and then we will pose those questions to Abby at that time. So without further ado, I shall pass it over to you, Abby, to introduce yourself.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to be speaking more about the energy audits that I complete in the surgeries across Cornwall, and just as much energy efficiency information as I can bombard at you in the shortest amount of time possible. So if you don't know much about Community Energy Plus, I'm the small business and community energy advisor there. We are an energy advice charity based in 3 Milestone. We offer independent advice and support to householders in Cornwall, as well as businesses, and we help guide people through fuel poverty and helping their homes become warmer and more energy efficient, and helping all of Cornwall move towards a more sustainable and low carbon future. So when it comes to energy efficiency, first thing to do is make sure that we're doing everything in the correct order. So first of all, we want to reduce our energy use as much as possible. So turning down your thermostat to try and use less heat, turning off any appliances or lights that you are not using, and turning things off of standby if possible as well, because that standby is a little bit of drain as well. Then once you've reduced your energy in that way, so maybe you've reduced your energy by 10%, say, with that 90% that you have to be using, now would be a good time to get an energy audit to understand your consumption and understand your baseline of where you're currently at. And this is when also you'd get your decarbonisation strategy and focus on the fabric first approach to the building. So you're focusing on insulation and upgrades to the property to make your energy use even more efficient. Then after all of that is done, you've reduced your energy use as much as possible. That's when we can think of the low carbon measures such as solar, batteries, and heat pumps. Okay, so heating is one of the main ways that we produce emissions in the UK. Heat is constantly trying to escape. Up to 25% is lost through the roof, 35% is lost through uninsulated walls, and we also have heat loss through windows, doors, and the floor as well. So this is where insulation is really, really valuable. And that's why at CEP we generally recommend taking that fabric first approach. So with the energy audits, after I've done all of my analysis, after visiting the property and the building, I take all of that analysis and then create a decarbonisation strategy for that building. And the first thing I really like to focus on for clients is to get quick wins. So that's the low cost and high impact measures that you can take to reduce your energy use as quickly as possible to get those bill reductions and energy reductions, and of course emission reductions as well. So I'm going to give you a few ideas around these. So behaviour change is the first one. So you're looking at an average 1 to 5% reduction with behaviour change. So a few ideas: turning off appliances when they're not in use, turning off lights when you don't need them, only filling the kettle with water that you need, unplugging appliances to save energy, try not to leave them on standby. Smart plugs are also a good way to do this, which I'll go into more detail in a moment for that. Keeping fridges and freezers more full if possible. They operate more efficiently if they're more full, and ensuring that they're regularly defrosted and that the space around them is well ventilated as well. It just helps them operate as efficiently as they can. Switch off and unplug any extra devices, so streamlining appliances as much as possible. If you have an office space with 6 people and you have 4 printers, you don't necessarily need all of those printers, and you're paying for the energy costs for those printers. So reducing that down to 1, if possible, is the best way to do it, and reduce that energy use, as well as leasing costs as well. The one I see quite a lot is medical fridges. Quite often a surgery or a healthcare building may have 10 medical fridges, and 2 of them might only be a quarter full. So it would be a good idea to cut that down and just have those fridges unplugged as backups for if they're needed. And reducing excessive lighting, so avoiding over illumination is also really important. If you have a lot of natural light in a space, as well as LEDs and fluorescent lighting, fluorescent tube lighting, and everything's on, you don't necessarily need that much lighting. So trying to turn off those fluorescent tube lighting as much as possible, as well as the LEDs, but the fluorescent lighting is much less energy efficient than LEDs, so that would be the priority. One that I find quite exciting is smart plugs with energy monitoring. You can plug these directly into the wall and then the appliance into the plug, and it links to an app on your phone, and it allows for greater control around that appliance, and also you're able to see when you're using the appliance how much energy you're using, and potentially how much it's costing you as well throughout the year. You can turn off the plug whilst you're away from the appliance as well, so that allows for that greater control and understanding the consumption patterns of your use of that appliance also. They are actually developing AI smart plugs that understand your consumption and then turn off the smart plug when it knows it's not going to be used. Smart meters with the displays are quite a good option as well. We generally see an average 3 to 5% reduction when these are implemented. They're useful for encouraging behaviour change of building users, as having the display out it makes people bring that behaviour change that they can do to the front of their mind, and they're able to see how much it's costing as well, the energy that they're using throughout the day. Right, a few more. Smart thermostat systems. So you may have heard of Nest or Hive. Those are in domestic settings, but you can get similar ones for non-domestic. We see an average 5 to 10% reduction in heat consumption. So you can get that app-controlled heating. Again, it's easier to control, and it allows for that app-controlled programming as well. Sometimes you might see a space that has a thermostat, which most building users can access, maybe even patients, and sometimes they might turn it up if they're a bit cold. But if there's 30 staff members trying just having access to control that heating, it may mean that the heating is turned on and then not turned off at the end of the day, which means that you're wasting that heating overnight, wasting that money overnight when the space isn't, when the heating isn't needed. Draft proofing is another good one. The heat reduction is around 2%, which isn't particularly high, but I really think draft proofing strips are worth considering, but just because they're so inexpensive, and you can DIY them, like do it yourself. So if you have an external door where there's a big gap down the middle or across the bottom, you can implement these draft proofing strips to reduce that airflow and reduce that heat loss also. And they can also be used on internal doors between an unheated space and a heated space, just to reduce that heat loss through to the unheated space also. I have seen them used on single glazed windows around the side, particularly if the window's been a little bit warped over time. They can reduce that heat loss there. A really, really important one to consider is your energy tariff. We have helped organisations in the past reduce their energy costs by up to 30% simply just because they were on the wrong tariff and didn't realise it. So if your gas charge is above 15p per kilowatt hour and standing charge above 80p, and then for electricity, if it's above 35p and £1.20, those are just some general baseline numbers. If you're above that, then it would be worth having a little shop around and seeing if there are any cheaper options out there. Your tariff can also help with reducing your emissions, as there are 100% renewable energy tariffs available that you could consider switching to reduce your electricity emissions. And then the final quick win is to switch to LEDs. So you'll likely see at least a 3% reduction in electricity through doing this, and at least 85% reduction in lighting costs. Movement sensors could also be something to consider where appropriate, just to make sure that lights are off as much as possible. Okay, so into the rest of the short-term measures. These two are more focused on that fabric first approach that I mentioned at the beginning. For insulation wise, the most accessible and the cheapest form of insulation is by far loft insulation. And you'll see an average 10 to 15% reduction in heat consumption with adequate loft insulation. We generally recommend a 270 to 300 mil depth of loft insulation. Make sure that it's evenly spread across the entire loft and not compacted. And yeah, as I said, it is the cheapest form of insulation. So it's a great one to do in the short term to reduce your heating needs. If you have quite an old building with extensions added on, if financially you want to spread out insulating the entire building, I would recommend giving priority to insulating the oldest sections of the building first, as these are likely to experience the greatest heat loss. CEP can signpost to companies that may be able to help you with this. I have my email address on the final slide, so you can email me for help with that. Moving on to windows and doors, you'll see an average 5% reduction in heat consumption through upgrading windows and doors. Generally, we recommend double glazing. And if you're double glazing, if you already have double glazing, which most places probably will, if your double glazing is pre-2002, something to consider is that the older UPVC double glazing does deteriorate a little bit more than the newer technology post 2002. So that could be something to financially plan for the future. You will get less heat loss with the newer double glazing. Or as if you're in a conservation area or a listed building, then you may not be able to do double glazing. So that's when secondary glazing could be utilised. Secondary glazing is often a little bit cheaper than double glazing. And you could also do like draft proofing and strips and stuff in combination with that to just try and get that heat loss down as much as possible, even if you do have a listed building. Another thing that could be done in combination with upgrading the windows is thermal blinds or curtains. So these insulating thermal blinds or curtains can reduce heat loss through the windows by 20 to 40%. If you are buying new blinds or curtains or plan to in the near future, I would recommend going for thermal blinds. And you could also ask staff members to make sure to shut the curtains and blinds overnight, just so you're trying to keep as much heat in the building overnight as possible to reduce your heating needs the next day. Okay, midterm recommendations. For walls, if you have a cavity wall, it might be filled, it might be unfilled, so we recommend to make sure that it's filled to reduce that 35% heat loss through the walls. But just something to be aware of, not to worry about, but just something to be aware of is if you are in a high wind or prevailing rain area, you really want to make sure that you go with a good installer. CEP can signpost for that, and also make sure that the walls are in really good condition, as damp penetration might become an issue if you don't ensure those things. If you have solid walls, there are two different options. There's external or internal insulation. External wall insulation can change the external appearance of the building, and it generally is a little bit more expensive. They're both pretty expensive measures, but external insulation in particular is expensive to do. So yeah, in that case, internal insulation may be an option. But yeah, internal insulation can be very disruptive because it's taking over that internal wall, and you reduce the floor area a little bit as well. Yeah, CEP can signpost to companies that may be able to help with that if you need some help with that. Floor insulation is also an option, so reducing that 15% that's of heat that's lost through the floor. We generally don't recommend it because it is very expensive and extremely disruptive to the space. So if you are doing big upgrades to the space, maybe adding an extension or redoing the floor, then floor insulation is something to consider, but generally we wouldn't really recommend it as an urgent priority. But there are insulation options for suspended and solid floors, so it is just another thing to think about. For appliances, review and possibly upgrade to A+ energy efficiency products where necessary, especially when appliance is old and needs to be replaced anyway. It's just worth thinking about getting as high on that energy efficiency scale that you get on products now as possible. Okay, moving on to long-term recommendations. So this is when we're thinking about solar and batteries and heat pumps. So for solar, a typical system costs between £1,000 and £1,200 per kilowatt. Unfortunately, we don't get the feed-in tariff anymore. However, it was replaced with the SEG payment, so the Smart Export Guarantee payment. And this is about 4.5p per unit. I have seen as high as 6p, so it's worth shopping around and seeing what price you can get with the energy providers. So the SEG payment is given when you have excess solar generation and it's exported to the grid. That's the money that you receive back for that. Solar is a great option if you have high daytime electricity usage, which in healthcare generally is the case, but it is a harder case if your use of the building is generally in the evening. Just a few little points to consider before considering going for solar is the shading around the property. If your shading of the roof space is quite high and significant, then your generation, of course, is going to be lower. Orientation, so if you have a north-facing roof, your generation is going to be lower than if you have a south-facing roof. Quality of roof and pitch, so you really want to make sure that your roof is in good maintained, well maintained, and you're not going to have any problems after installing the panels. And then with solar, of course, they're brilliantly paired, the panels are brilliantly paired with batteries. So all of your excess solar generation can be stored in those batteries. If it's peak summer, you're going to have excess generation to what you're using. If you can go for a battery financially, that would be a great option, because then instead of getting that measly 4.5p back for the excess solar generation, it's better to save on the electricity that you would be drawing from the grid, where it might be 25, 30p. And another thing that you can do with batteries is you can switch to a cheaper overnight tariff. So like Octopus have options for this, like an economy 7 type tariff. So it might be 12p overnight, and then you charge up the battery on the cheaper tariff and then utilize that electricity throughout the following day. And that could be a way to save money on your bills as well. For heat storage, if you are reliant on electric heating, the most efficient form of storage heaters are the high heat retention heaters, so the Dimplex Quantums, and you're able to program these as well to charge up overnight on the Economy 7 tariff, utilising that lower cost and then using that heat throughout the day. For solar, you could also have a diverter into the hot water storage tank. So like similar to an immersion tank, you're just utilizing that excess solar if you don't have a battery, or as well as a battery if your generation is high, utilizing that excess solar into heating up the water. So the most efficient form of electric heating is heat pumps. Now, with the technology improving so much, we get heat pumps where you put in 1 kilowatt of electricity and you're getting 5 kilowatts of heat out. So the technology is just improving year on year. You have ground source heat pumps and air source heat pumps. For ground source, generally they are very expensive, unfortunately, but they are efficient to run all year round, and very cheap to run just because the ground stays at a stable temperature all throughout the year. You can get a borehole ground source heat pump or a slinky pipework heat pump. So a borehole, of course, you're drilling down into the ground, and then a slinky pipework ground source heat pump would be a shallow trench that they dig, and then it goes back and forth, slinking round. So something to consider before going for a heat pump is you need to make sure that the heat loss calculations and the heat pump is sized correctly for the property. So that's why I haven't really spoken about heat pumps until quite late on, even though it is a great low carbon option, because we really want to make sure that all of those insulation measures are put in place. So if you asked an installer to come to your building and you have 100 mil of loft insulation and an unfilled cavity, they're going to have to size the heat pump a lot larger to meet the heat demand, and like taking into account the excess heat loss from the building, than if I had 300 mil of loft insulation and a filled cavity. Your heat pump would get to be smaller, so you'd be saving on running costs and of course installation costs as well. And this is the same for air source as well. For air source heat pumps, you have two different types: air to water and air to air. So air to water, it's a normal radiator system, and generally they are much cheaper than a ground source heat pump, so 12 to 15,000 typically. And yeah, as ground source heat pumps are able to be so efficient throughout the entire year, an air source heat pump generally has to work a little bit harder, so it can be a tiny little bit more costly to run than a ground source heat pump. And then another option for air source heat pump is air to air. So you can think of this as very similar to an aircon unit. So it can do cooling and dehumidifying as well, which might be useful for the healthcare building. Then they are also much, much cheaper and more accessible than other different types of heat pump, but unfortunately they generally don't really qualify for grants. Something to consider with the switch to heat pumps that we will all experience going forward to meet our net zero goals. With a gas boiler, you can kind of use it however you'd want. You could blast the heat up, bring the temperature up in the building to 20, 21 degrees, and then switch off the heating, and then slowly the heat will leak out, and then you could switch on the boiler again and bring it back up, and then you could do the boosts throughout the day, and that won't add much extra cost to how you're using the heating. However, with a heat pump, if you were to use it in that way, if you were to use it in the big bursts to bring the temperature up, the heat pump's going to have to be working incredibly, incredibly hard to bring the heat up to your desired temperature. And then when you switch it off again, it's just going to have to do it all again later. So generally, we recommend a low and slow approach to using a heat pump for heating. So this is when that programming aspect is really, really useful for heating with a heat pump, because you don't want to be using it in the wrong way and adding extra costs to your electricity bill. If for whatever reason your building isn't suitable for a heat pump, then if you're relying on heating oil, there is the potential to switch to HVO, so vegetable oil. I believe they are trialing this right now. If you email me, I can send more information if you're interested in this. I believe you just have to change a little bit of your oil boiler for a small cost, and then you can switch out the vegetable oil directly for the heating oil, and it reduces your emissions by 70%, which is great. And it could also be something to do in the short term before switching to a heat pump, maybe 10-15 years in the future. And biomass boilers could also be a consideration if the insulation in the building is adequate. So a little bit more about the energy audits that I complete at CEP. The aim of them is to identify where and how and when the energy is used in the building. So I come and look at the heating, so looking at the boiler and the radiators or the storage heaters, and looking at the hot water, maybe the tank, seeing how many tanks you have, your hot water demand and how much you need. Looking at all of the appliances in the building as well, if you can streamline the appliances at all, as I mentioned earlier, and which appliances are adding to your bill and your emissions. Same with lighting, if you have LEDs, if you have non-LEDs, and if you can improve the efficiency of this at all. And then the fabric of the building, so looking at the heat loss, looking at the windows and how much loft insulation you have, and what other forms of insulation you have. On the day, I would arrive at the property, and the audit roughly takes around 90 minutes. Of course, that's dependent on the size of the building. I will need 12 months of energy bills, ideally on the day or before I arrive, and I check your energy use throughout the year and see if you're on the most suitable tariff as well. I would need access to the boilers and the meters, and ideally every room in the property, just so I can get a full overview of all of the different ways that the building is using energy. And we also do some thermal imaging, so looking at the heat loss from the building, and I also use it to look at covered lights to see if it's an LED or a non-LED, as non-LEDs generally release a lot more heat than LEDs, as they're much less efficient. That's my email address. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me. I hope all of this information was useful. Yeah, and if there's any questions, I can answer them now.
Thank you very much, Abby. That's been fantastic. Loads and loads of information there.
So
We've
much.
got a round of applause from some people. So thank you. And I know it's quite, it's a lot to go through. So thank you for that. We have had a few questions and a few comments. Thank you for everyone who's put things in the chat. First thing is just a little bit of chat about the smart plugs. And this is really interesting because I heard about these smart plugs when you did this presentation last year and thought, oh yes, I should get some of those, and I still haven't got them. So it's prompted me to go, yes, I need to try that. So and thank you, Matt has put in the chat an example of one that you've used. So if you wanted to share any more about your experience with the smart plugs, Matt. But the question really was about rough cost and any recommendations. So I don't know who wants to go first with that.
I've seen smart plugs like £5 each, £15 for 3. That's very rough cost. There's loads and loads of different options. I personally have the taco ones at home, but yeah, if anyone else has any recommendations.
Brilliant. There seems to be, yeah, a lot to choose from. I did a quick search and there's so many different types to choose. Matt, do you
Mm,
want to come in there and share your experience?
Yeah, I use Lightwave, and found I think it depends on what you want them to be used for as to which is the best to buy. I don't think cheap is necessarily the right approach if it
yeah.
doesn't do the thing that you want it to do. So we've got two smart plugs, a smart socket, so it's part of the wall, and a smart light switch. And I can control everything from an app, and I can turn stuff on and stuff off so that there's uh, robber settings, like so that the house comes on at different times of the day. So that I think it depends on. So I can also monitor how much energy it uses and what it's going to cost, and that works for what I need it for. And I think it very much depends on if you want one kill switch for the whole practice, so the last one out presses a button and everything that is plugged in gets turned off. So printers and monitors and everything other than the fire alarm and the medical fridge. That's great. But if you don't want
Mm.
that, well, I think it's about finding the one that's appropriate for the thing that you need it for.
Thank you, Matt. That's a really good point. I think it is obviously a lot of people are using stuff at home, but will it work in a practice or in a community hub or whatever building you're using? So yeah, probably a little bit more. Tim, did you want to come in there about smart plugs?
Not about smart plugs. Unless Matt, are you a particular control freak? It sounds with the things. Who knows? I was going to ask more about the LEDs and fluorescent lights and things. I mean, yeah, obviously, as appliances get old and they're replaced, everyone's replacing them with LEDs. But do you recommend sort of just because there's a carbon cost to obviously replacing fluorescent tubes and things like that? I mean, do you reckon? Is some kind of formula you have that they should definitely be replaced now? Does it depend on how many hours a day they're actually on for, or something like that? That you're over a certain amount, then you're going to save more than it's going to cost by just keeping them until they need to be replaced.
Yeah, it depends on I guess like how much money you have aside to replace them. I think most places will naturally be replacing them anyway as they go along, as they break. And fluorescent doesn't last as long as LED, so that's going to happen sooner anyway. Um, yeah, as you say, it depends on how many fluorescent lights you have in the surgery as well. So if you have 100 fluorescent lights, it's going to be adding up over the year. Like that might be £1,000, £2,000 even. Um, it just depends how many you have. So yeah, you're right. If it's only a few, then maybe it's just worth waiting until they break and then replacing them with LEDs then.
Yeah, I mean, I know it from the hospital point of view. We some years ago replaced all the corridor lights that were fluorescent lights with LEDs,
Mm.
and that made sense. But in smaller buildings, I
Mm.
wonder what the cost benefit is. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Matt, I think you were first to come back there.
Um, quite agree with Abigail. It's if it's on 10 hours a day and something else is on for 1 hour a year, don't replace the one that's in the cupboard that never gets used. Replace the one that does get used. I put a
Mhm.
link in the chat to top10.eu, and I use this site quite a bit, not just for lighting, but for a whole host of other things,
Mhm.
because it gives you a how much does it cost over 15 years or over 5 years, depending on the product, so that you can look at both the computer monitors, the washing machines, the fridges, whatever it is that you want. And you can then see the whole lifetime cost rather than just the upfront cost of buying a thing. Um, compare if you have a look at fridges, say for a practice, there are some which will cost you 200 quid to buy, but 400 quid to run. There's another one that'll cost you 300 quid to buy, but only £100 to run. So for me, it's the when the thing is no longer efficient, I use a site like this one to work out what's the most energy efficient purchase that I can now afford to make. Use it for home as well. But something like this that kind of takes that legwork away from you of should I, shouldn't I, do I, don't I replace this thing? what can I replace it with? I think it kind of breaks the back of all of that hard work.
Thank you. That's fantastic. Never seen that
Yeah,
before.
that's great.
Thanks for sharing that. Really, really good. So yeah, we'll definitely be sharing that site for lots of different things. And I think you're right, making decisions about, we're always thinking, right, I need to make some changes. Where do I start? And all those sorts of things. And that's where obviously Abby doing the audit can help. But yeah, generally anything that gives us more information to make those informed decisions would be fantastic. Thank you, Matt. Spencer, do you want to come in there?
I think just to add in terms of what we've done with the lights here is that a lot of the lighting and the technology that's there is becoming obsolete anyway. So we couldn't replace them if we wanted to. So we've actually had a natural kind of maintenance replace schedule, knowing which ones were the older ones, knowing that we couldn't change them. So we've kind of budgeted over the next kind of 12, 15 months that all of them are going to be done, and we're kind of sporadically going around the building doing that. So without putting ourselves in a really difficult position, thinking we need to change everything, we've got a plan there for the next 15 months. Everything will be changed, and we've done kind of half or three quarters of the building now as they kind of go. So I think the reality of it is you can't replace a lot of these things anyway, so you're going to have to do it. So if you do, yeah, you can put a plan in, a maintenance schedule like this, the less it's going to bite you in the backside and have to do it all in one go. Then I think you can naturally do it and schedule it properly.
Yes, I completely agree with you, Spencer. And I think you're not alone. I think a lot of places are having that gradual, they're kind of forced into it a little bit, but having a bit of forethought and planning to do it gradually, yeah, definitely works well. Martin.
It's a quick question for Spencer, really. So I don't know if this is one you can answer, but you've obviously got the new wing and you've got the old part. So I don't know how you get your bills and things, but I'm thinking that in the older part, for example, you replace the LEDs as they fail, and the newer part, they all went in, and that's just one example. So has it allowed you to get a comparison between, an all new building and one you're adapting, or does it all come under one bill?
It does come under one bill here, do you mean? But at the same time, because we were able to monitor, we've done that big piece of work, and we recently, where we've looked at our energy consumption, and we've been able to really drill down. We were way overspending, particularly with our solar panel and our battery storage. I think so. We've reduced ours dramatically at the moment. But what was very noticeable then, a very modern, efficient, energy efficient building, that our actual bills weren't noticeably going up very high compared to what we were already spending. So it does really show how energy efficient this building is. And actually, I think even though our energy storage that we were selling back to the grid has gone down slightly now because we're using some of that to fuel here, I haven't actually seen a massive dramatic increase in our actual energy, which shows that this new building's pretty energy efficient actually, and everything's done on timer and sensor here. Do you mean? So if nobody's in a room for more than I think about a minute, the lights go out anyway. We've put loads of stuff in like that, so this building is really energy efficient.
And following on from that, so taking printers as one example, if you're setting up a new building, you just kind of set it up as is. Whereas in the old building, so for example, if you want to reduce the amount of printers in the older building, you've got to sort of take it away from people. Whereas when you're setting up a new building, you can just set it up. Did that sort of make any difference as well? Do you know what I'm driving at?
I think we've been fairly cute with our printer stuff for a long time, haven't we, in terms of what we've been doing anyway. So I think people are kind of bought in, and the fact that we replaced all of the old CCG ICB printers, and the fact that we've got this cold start technology, which means people aren't waiting for ages. People don't really mind sharing terminals with us, because as soon as they print, they get an instant print from cold start. It wasn't as if they were waiting for ages and having to do that. So no, the team have been fairly receptive here as we've reduced printers and things like that. It hasn't really been an issue.
Thank you. I think Annette might have frozen.
Yeah, you've been
sorry,
you've been nominated host.
Yeah, I've just seen the note there. So I had a question, Abby, and for anyone else back in the chat. So in terms of like floor covering, and you mentioned how rare it would be to recommend insulating underground. Is there a benefit? Like, would you ever recommend a practice or somewhere to carpet rather than hard floors? And the obvious follow on there for a practice is, I'm assuming there are some rooms which could not be carpeted. So, yeah, any thoughts on that?
I think I'm not sure that would make the biggest difference. I think that would
Okay.
be more a difference in like the thermal comfort of the building rather than the actual heat loss.
Okay.
So it's probably there might be a slight benefit from having carpet, but it wouldn't be considerable if there isn't any insulation.
Okay. And then the other one I had is, I've noticed this with just sort of buying blinds at home. So you mentioned thermal blinds. Is there a particular standard with those? Because I seem to have noticed that everyone now will call their blinds thermal because they know it sells. So is there something in particular to look out for when you are buying thermal blinds? Or is it just going to be the cost?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. I don't think I've been asked that before. I kind of have certain brands that are like trustworthy, but yeah, you're right. People do call call them all thermal now, don't they? And insulating. I'm not 100% sure on that one.
Okay. I noticed the same thing with blackout blinds for the
Mhm.
children, and then you buy them, it's like, this is not a blackout blind at all. It's just something you put to sell it now, isn't it? Okay.
Yeah,
Go
yeah.
go for it, Spencer.
Again, going on about the new building, and so our thermal blinds, so you can see, are built into the windows.
Okay.
So one, it was really good for infection control, obviously, in the building while we were doing this. But yeah, it gave us extra insulation as part of it. So it's in between the double glazing, so it's all built inside. So it's really good, actually.
Thank you. And I know I've seen as well that you've written, I think, Abby, that vertical blinds are the worst for heating or retaining the heat. And I think that's often what you find when you go into practice is the vertical blinds. Does anyone know, is there a particular reason for that? Does there seem to be a benefit in practices of vertical blinds?
I presume it's from an infection control perspective that it's one of those that can be cleaned easily, that can be removed easily, can be lifted up and down.
Okay.
That's the only reason why I can think of, but it seems to be standard practice. I think that's right, Matt. I don't know if you've seen anything different in places, but most clinical settings always seem to have vertical blinds. I just presume it's for infection control.
I think that whenever I don't know the answer to a question, the answer is always going to be money.
Yeah.
Um, I'm I'm still here. I haven't gone anywhere. I hope you can still hear me.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, my internet's so bad. I hope it doesn't affect the recording, but I am yeah, I'm still back now, hopefully. So blinds, it's really interesting because yesterday I'm looking for blinds at home, and yesterday I went to a local producer or manufacturer of the blinds, but I was really pleasantly surprised to find out that the price difference wasn't that massive between your standard sort of the blinds and the ones that are called cellular. So they kind of make this honeycomb, which obviously traps more air and then insulates a lot more. So I think it's a fairly new sort of type of blinds, but they still go up and down on your window, fit in a very similar way, but they just look they don't look any different, but they are more energy efficient. They trap more air, and that work seems to work very well. So I'm excited that I'm going to be able to have those at home. Obviously, they are maybe a little bit more expensive, and again, it's like the team conversation. It's about how you can afford it, when you can afford it, and maybe doing it gradually over time. So that was my little comment about blinds. Matt, did you want to say some more?
just in terms of one of the places that practices lose heat is the front door. Some practices have got revolving doors, some have got a little lobby area, some use air curtains, which is basically, it looks a bit like an air conditioning unit, but it blows air straight down, so that if it's an outward opening door, you have this on the inside, and it basically is moving air that stops the warm air from the inside leaving the building when the doors open. And it's a really clever, nifty piece of kit. So if you've only got one door between the outside world and the waiting room or whatever, an air curtain can sometimes prevent heat loss through that door.
Thanks, Matt. Yes, we have seen that. I've seen it with Abby when we've been visiting. Did you want to say any more, Abby, on that as a solution?
Yeah, they can definitely help with heat loss reduction, but they particularly like the older ones may bring up your electricity bills a tiny bit, just a smidge. But yeah, that's just something to keep an eye on.
Thank you both. Thank you very much. So I'm going to check through the chat. Matt's put in loads of useful things. Thank you so much. So links to the boiler upgrade scheme, building upgrade scheme. So you can at the moment still apply. Obviously, things might change in the near future. And thank you, Matt, for sharing about your air source heat pump at home. And I was going to sort of share the same, really. Yeah, we've been really pleased with our air source heat pump at home, but also down the road, my local surgery has recently had an air source heat pump installed, and they're really pleased with it. And I know they're not the only practice in Cornwall with an air source heat pump, but they're not many of them. So they have invested. It wasn't cheap, and they have made a decision as partners to invest in an air source heat pump. Basically to sort of future proof and to cut their carbon footprint. But the initial feedback from them is that they're really pleased. They've got hotter water, they've got warmer rooms, and the installers were amazing, because obviously they're a busy surgery. They didn't really want to have to close at all. So the installers worked overnight. So they'd come in at 6 o'clock in the evening, and they installed the system, because obviously it can be noisy, and they'd have to go into certain rooms. So they installed overnight, which was fantastic. So that's been a real positive. And another thing I was just going to share, I was on a different meeting I think last week, and again talking about air source heat pumps. So apparently they're being installed in lots of rented accommodation, the sort of Cornwall Council rented accommodation. And one thing they're finding is, like you were saying, Abby, people need to learn a bit more about how to use their air source heat pump, and maybe that message isn't getting across. So the council are looking to do some sort of myth busting around air source heat pumps, because I think it's some people sometimes there's a bit of a bad press, and that was one thing that we had to challenge with the surgery down the road. When they were making the decision, they kind of heard bad things, and I think there's definitely some myth busting. So the more good news stories we can share, the better. But yeah, that behaviour change, it is different. When we first changed, you don't blast out your heating in the morning and then hope that it'll sort of last throughout the day. You have this low steady temperature, and it definitely works harder in the winter, but during the summer your energy bills are very low, so it all balances out. And yeah, I'm sure Matt's got a blog. Everyone can find that on the website there. And you've done the stats. I haven't yet done any number crunching, so maybe you've inspired me, Matt, to actually look back over our bills and see how it's changed. But that's really useful. Thank you. Martin's got a question.
Yeah, I'm thinking there should be at least, well, several of you who could answer this, but yeah, just basically whenever you get given a quote, whatever, for solar panels, it will be sort of 3 small battery, no battery, large battery, and how long typically it would take to sort of pay for itself. I haven't seen that so much for heat pumps. Does that exist, or do the same principles work? Matt may already have the answer to that if I would just read his piece there. But yeah, just a quick question.
I'll let Abigail answer her bit first.
It would depend if you're coming from gas or electric. So if you're coming from a gas boiler, then I would generally say no, because your electricity bill may increase a little bit, but then you would be losing your gas bill, so that's positive. But then I would say yes if you're coming from electric heating. I'm not sure how you'd really calculate it though, but the installer might be able to help with that, because you're gaining on the efficiency of the heat pump. So if you're coming from a storage heater or electric panel heaters, 1 kilowatt of electricity in is 1 kilowatt of heat out. But then with the heat pumps, it's 1 kilowatt of electricity in and then between 3 and 5 kilowatt of heat out. So you'd be gaining that huge amount of efficiency there. So then you could argue the payback time thing. Yeah, I'm not sure if Matt has another perspective. That, yeah.
I look at the whole life costs. If you say that a gas boiler costs 1,500 quid to put in, but £2,000 a year to run, versus an air source heat pump that costs you 5,000 to put in, oh, that's terrible. But if it's only going to cost you 500 quid a year to run, well, it's one of these that there's a break-even point. And I think that it's about equivalent over a lifetime rather than is this better for me in 1 year or another year. So year one, air source heat pump is more expensive because you pay for the thing to be installed. I think the other is that electricity prices are likely to get cheaper over the next decade. Gas prices are not. So if we have more wind, more solar, more nuclear, more non-fossil fuel, and we lose that volatility, that will improve electricity prices. Whether the budget knocks 5% of VAT off electric prices, don't know yet. But that will happen, I suspect, if not this year, then at some point over the next decade. Gas prices, I think, realistically will only go up because gas is harder to find. It's more remote, more offshore. So for me, it's about one of the reasons that we did it was personal comfort. My wife is happier. We don't argue over the thermostat anymore. It's beautiful. Part of it was, over the whole lifetime, our electricity price is going to get cheaper. If you put an air source in now, and then in a few years you put solar on, well, you're actually going to be generating your own electric for your heat pump anyway. You're never going to put a gas mine in your garden or a gas rig and say, oh, but we're now self-sufficient in natural gas. It's not going to happen. So I think that I would look at it over the whole lifetime rather than 1 year to the other. Roughly, I'm about 700 quid a year better off having the air source in rather than having gas. So over 10 years, that's £7,000. Did it cost me £7,000 to put in? No, it was less than that, but that's because I got the effectively the grant at the time. Who knows what's going to happen in terms of incentives over the next week, next few years? Don't know yet.
So, I mean, it definitely seems to be a pattern. The practice, I know in Cornwall, they kind of said it had come to the end of its life, the old one, and then with the boiler upgrade scheme that was there at the time, it made the comparative cost with the gas boiler about the same. So they went for it, not to save money, but it was equivalent, so they did it that way. And given that over the next, let's say, 20 years to 2045, a lot of practices, their boilers are going to go, it's something really they should be looking to do at that time. Similar principle to the LEDs, really, albeit a much bigger expenses when it goes. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a really clear answer. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Hopefully you can still hear me.
Yeah.
Sorry about the poor internet. It's been fine for all week and now today. So like I said, I hope it hasn't affected the recording. I will check it before I share it, but thank you so much. We are close approaching the end of the meeting. Any final comments or questions? It's been really, really helpful, Abby, to have you here and everyone else's input as well. It's been really, really useful. Thank you, especially Matt and Spencer. Your knowledge and expertise is really valued in this area, as well as with Abby. So thank you very much. I will share the recording, like I said, on our website and in the GRF, and then hopefully we will have another Bright Ideas session in the new year. Thank you ever so much for joining. I will stop recording right now.